Three kings trapped in a barren wilderness, a prophet who commands nature, and a divine challenge to dig ditches in dry land. Will faith be enough when survival and war hang in the balance? Welcome to Your Week with St. Luke's, your weekly podcast from St. Luke's United Methodist Church in Orlando that invites you to go deeper with Scripture to learn God's story, so that together we can live, love, and lead a life following Jesus to awaken disciples and reveal the kingdom. This week, we're joined again by Dr. Ryan Bonfiglio from the Candler Foundry to continue our series on 2 Kings. Let's jump into the conversation. All right, welcome back, St. Lukers. We're so excited again to have our friend Ryan here. Ryan, thank you for
Hello.
being here today. I'm here with Pastor Jenn, of course, and I'm Liz. Hello. And we're going to jump right in. So we are still in 2 Kings. Today we are in chapter 3, and I'm going to go ahead and read for us verses 13 through 19. It says, Elisha said to Israel's king, "What do we have to do with each other? Go to your father's or mother's prophets." Then Israel's king said to him, "Don't say that, because it is the Lord who has brought us 3 kings together, but only to hand us over to Moab." Elisha said, "I swear by the life of the Lord of heavenly forces, the one I stand before and serve, if I didn't care about Judah's king Jehoshaphat, I wouldn't notice you or even look at you. Now, bring me a musician." While the musician played, the Lord's power came over Elisha. He said, "This is what the Lord says. This valley will be filled with pools. This is what the Lord says. You won't see any wind or rain, but that valley will be full of water. Then you will be able to drink, you, your cattle, and your animals. This is easy for the Lord to do. He will also hand Moab over to you. You will then attack every fort and every grand city, cutting down all the good trees, stopping up all of the springs, and ruining the good fields with stones." Fun.
I don't think I've ever heard a sermon on this text, which I think, way to go, St. Luke's.
Right?
Way to go.
We're trying. So, we've jumped forward a little bit in the story, right?
Mhm.
From where we were last week. So can you catch us up on what's happening between chapter 2 and chapter 3 here?
Yeah, for sure. The transition from Elijah to Elisha is complete. Now the story focuses completely on the student, Elisha. And a couple things have happened. He's sort of started his independent ministry. He's performed his first couple of miracles. The first one, he takes undrinkable water and purifies it. It might remind us a little bit of Jesus's first miracle in the Gospel of John, where he turns water into wine. Maybe he thought only wine was drinkable. I don't know. I'll leave that to you to decide. Elisha's second miracle is totally bizarre. Here's what happens. Elisha's walking along, and a bunch of kids. I'm a dad of a 6th grader, so I'm just imagining that it's 6th graders who come along, because this tracks very clearly with my understanding of a 6th grader. They come along and they start teasing the prophet for being bald. And Elisha gets really mad. And so he curses them, and he sends out 2 bears, and the bears maul the kids for teasing him. It's really weird. This is not like your children's message for this week, although maybe it is, depending on how the kids are behaving. I'll leave that to you. But what's going on with these early miracles? One way to think about it is that taken together, these first 2 miracles in Elisha's ministry signal the prophet's power to bless in the form of giving drinkable water, and the prophet's power to curse. Or maybe better to say, like, God's power to bless and to curse. The thing is, I think the thing to keep in mind, and this doesn't fully resolve it, is that these prophets were not seen as like your buddy down the street. They sort of carried with them this like numinous and dangerous presence. Like, yes, they were agents of God who could bring about incredible blessing in the world, but they also were there to call into question the things about the world that weren't right. If it's mundane idea of like teasing, but more seriously in the injustices of kings, like they were not to be trifled with. And I think that's a little bit of the takeaway of this. Like these sorry, let me try that again. These prophets are powerful individuals that represent God on earth.
So the first line, verse 13, I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
Elisha seems reluctant to help.
Yeah.
Right? So he says to the king of Israel, "What do I have in common with you? Go consult prophets of your father and mother."
Yeah, that's a weird thing to say to the king, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and remember back to our last episode, we talked about how about 75 years before this time, the kingdom splits apart, and you've got the kings in the north and you've got the kings in the south. And here, Elisha, who's from the south, is addressing the king from the north. And at this point, the kings in the north were totally corrupt. And not only were they corrupt politicians, but they were worshiping other gods and following other prophets. And
Mhm.
Elisha knows that. So he's sort of jabbing at the king a little bit and says, look, you've got your prophets. Go consult the prophets of Baal or whatever other
Mhm.
strange gods you follow. Maybe they will help you out. So he's kind of pressing to the surface this political division, but also the religious divisions that accompanied it.
Hmm. But well, I'm just thinking I got lost there because I'm like, so he's like, go back to your yes man is really
Yeah.
what happens,
Like, yeah,
right?
you want help? Yeah,
Go
you've
have
got
it.
God for that. Go
Yeah.
see if they work. And this like actually mirrors a sort of dynamic that Elijah had. Because remember back in First Kings, um, Elijah has this big confrontation with the prophets of Baal. And it's really just to say like which God is real, the God of
Mhm.
Israel or Baal, which is the true God. And so I think this is calling back to that earlier moment in the story and saying, yeah, let's see if your prophets can help you out of this mess. And the mess, by the way, is that they're in the wilderness and they're about to go to war with the king of Moab, but they get stuck in the wilderness and they're without water. So
Right.
there's like a real desperation in this moment. And but Elisha doesn't come to the aid, at least not at first. He doesn't.
Yeah.
So
But it
he,
says eventually he does, right?
yeah, right.
Eventually. So why do you think that was the case? Like what swayed him?
Yeah, I think there's at least two things, and they're probably not mutually exclusive. So on the one hand, the kings going to war against Moab included the king of Israel, but it also included the king of Judah. And in these stories of the prophets in the Old Testament, God is always on the side of the kings of Judah, not the kings of the northern part of Israel. So maybe Elisha comes to the aid simply because him helping would actually aid the king of Judah and all of his troops. So that might be part of it. But I actually also think, and maybe this is the bigger thing, is that there's some sense of like humanitarian compassion. Like,
Mhm.
yes, the king of Israel was corrupt. Yes, he worshiped the wrong gods, right? All of that is true. But real people were facing real suffering in this moment. Starvation, thirst, like the physical condition of innocent people were in question. And it seems to be that sort of the prophet's concern for that overrides political allegiances. That is, the folks deserved aid regardless of who their king was. Politics in this text can't and shouldn't get in the way of actually giving people access to basic human needs. You cannot deny the suffering of others just because they're not on your side politically. I think we're seeing that vividly, and oh my gosh, do we need that message in our world today?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the world we're living in, not just nationally, but around the globe. Like,
Yeah.
what becomes more important to us? Our power, our might, our status, whether or not people are bowing to us, or whether people need help. Do they need food? Do they need, yeah, that's
Yeah.
just powerful.
It's empathy that
Right.
we need. And what's crazy is in certain conservative Christian circles recently, there have been this spate of books published against empathy. They were making a Christian argument about why Christians ought not to be empathetic. And I have to say, it is insanity. I mean, the gospel drips with empathy. Jesus embodies empathy in so much of what he does, but this is a way in which politics leads theology.
Right.
Because we have political opponents, we need to create theologies that justify those decisions, those affiliations. And these books show that, and yet our text demonstrates the opposite.
Right.
Actually, politics is always should be led by theology. It shouldn't lead theology.
Well, and it's so interesting because I've heard some conversation too about the Jesus of the Sermon on the Mount, and the Jesus who's empathetic is not strong enough. We need to go back to an Old Testament religion, but this is in the Old Testament. This is the empathy. We see empathy at the very beginning when God sews clothes for Adam and Eve before he sends them out of the garden. I mean, empathy is a part of the Old Testament, and I think even more so with Chesed seen throughout than it is in the New Testament. But anyway, we've gone off. So let me ask you this. Elisha, he's getting ready to help, and you think he's going to do one thing, but he goes and he calls a musician. Why? Why? I mean, I like music, and I think everyone should have a walk-in music and a walk-out music, but what's this about?
Yeah, he just needed a hype man, right? He just needed some good music to to set the tone, right? Like that, like sort of in baseball where you have that walk-up music when the batter comes to the batter's box. I like to think of it as that, Jen. And also, it probably gestures to the fact that in the Old Testament, interestingly, music is often associated with prophetic activity. For instance, 1 Samuel 10. The prophet Samuel is getting ready for battle against the Philistines, and he encounters a band of prophets, and he wants to consult them. And the prophets start playing the flutes and the harp and the drum and all this other stuff. And it says that this music puts Samuel into a prophetic frenzy. But in the Old Testament, frenzy just means prophetic activity. It's as if the music sort of aligns the prophet to God, or aligns the prophet to the right discernment for God's will in that moment. It's really interesting, but it's, I think, to an ancient reader who knows what prophets do and what they're like, they would not be at all surprised to see the little musical interlude here before Elisha does his thing.
So does that go true with prophetic frenzy? I mean, that's a pretty dramatic kind of word. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, I think the English translation of frenzy kind of tips the balance a little bit towards something like bizarre and weird. I don't know what you think of when you think of a frenzy. I think of my son when he's hungry and hasn't planned ahead for food. There's a frenzy, and it's not a positive thing. I should just add. But there aren't those negative connotations in the Hebrew. It just means the prophetic engine was getting revved up. He was about to do what he does as a prophet. So it's sort of just the music provides this background in which prophetic activity can take place.
Yeah, got it.
I love that. As somebody who leads worship, that makes sense to me.
Right.
Right. Like that totally resonates with the church that I grew up in, right? And how worship would set the stage for God's word to be preached and received, right? So that totally makes sense.
Absolutely.
Now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the prophet then tells them to start digging ditches all over the place.
Yeah.
And that those ditches will become full of water, right? Go. It's going to be a miracle. And there's going to be no rain. What is happening here?
What is happening? Yeah. Remember two things. They're in the wilderness, right? So they're on the eastern side of the Jordan River, like a very dry and barren place. So the fact that they don't have water makes a lot of sense in this moment. But here's the thing to remember about the wilderness in this part of the world. It wasn't just that the wilderness was completely dry. The wilderness was known for having no water and then very quickly way too much water. So what would happen in the ancient world, and still today actually in this part of the world, is that you would have really dry conditions, and then you would get these wildly heavy rainfalls. And the rainfalls would cause flash floods immediately. So you went from not having enough water to way too much water all at once. In fact, if you go to this part of the world today, you'll even still see signs that warn people about flash floods in these dry conditions. There's basically no built-in basins to contain the abundance of water that comes from these rainfalls. So with that in mind, think again about what Elisha's doing. He's saying dig ditches, begin to prepare for this abundance that I'm going to give you. Because if you don't have these ditches, the abundance of water is not going to be blessing. It's actually going to be a curse. There have to, in other words, the people had a role to play in preparing to receive this incredible thing that God was about to do.
Which is hope, right?
Yeah.
But it's not blind hope. It's not just, well, the rains will come. It's I believe in this, and we
Yeah.
have to work with God's miracles to help it, right? Isn't that,
Yeah.
am I
Yeah.
reading that too easily?
No, I like where you're heading with that, Jen. I would say it's maybe difference between optimism and hope.
Mm,
Optimism is just like this like happy belief that everything will turn out okay. Hope is this more textured, weathered, tested resilience that participates in the world turning toward something healing and reconciling. And so another way to say it is that in hope, we're never passive, we're never a passive audience to hope.
mhm.
Hope is always participatory. And that doesn't mean that we always are generating the solution ourselves. Here, clearly, God is generating the solution. But people have to participate in that process of cultivating hope by digging the ditches. The digging of the ditches is not the same thing as the miracle. I don't think digging a ditch is miraculous, although it
No,
might be hard. But
right.
both are actually needed. You need God to intervene in a decisive way, but you needed to have prepared expectantly that God would do something, right? And that's why the digging of ditches is actually this incredibly faith filled activity, right? It hasn't started raining, but it's an anticipation of something that God has promised that activates us and invites us into recreating the world around us. And I love that about this story.
Don't we see that a lot in the Old Testament? I keep thinking when you're talking about it, I keep thinking, God, we keep talking about movies. In Evan Almighty, where Steve
Yeah.
Carell is asked to build the ark, and he's like building it in the back of this suburban neighborhood. And people are like, what are you doing?
Yeah. And you got to think that people were asking Noah that same question. Like,
Right.
what are you doing? You are building an ark in a wilderness where there hasn't been rain. Or with Abraham, right? Abraham, in a different way, Abraham and Sarah, they're like well past their childbearing years. I mean,
Yeah.
well past. And they still join God in the hopeful expectation that they will bear a child, right? It's all of these moments where people are continuing in a hope within a present circumstances that does not make sense in it. And there's always something wild and faithful about showing up in that way in the world.
And it's not just, there is moments where we as faithful people are called to pray for rain, right? In a
Yeah.
drought. This is more than that.
Hmm.
This is saying I'm not just preparing for it to rain enough to moisten the soil, so I am preparing for the abundance. Like I
Yeah.
am asking God for this, and I am preparing that this is not going to be a scarcity gift
Mhm.
that God is giving us. It's going to be an abundant gift, and I'm going to make this abundance last for everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful way of putting it, Jen. It's as if, imagine this, um, these people, Abraham, Noah, then here again, those who dig the ditches, they're actually ordering and structuring their life as if God was real. That's what hope is. That is the invitation of the gospel, to order and structure our life as if Jesus was real. That's our invitation into discipleship. And that's what these stories are about in some really profound way.
So do you think that's the writer of Hebrews, right? What is it? Now faith is the
Yeah.
assurance of things hoped for,
Yeah.
right? The convictions of things not seen. Is that what this is connected to?
I think it's exactly that type of faith that Hebrews 13 is talking about. Where we go wrong with Hebrews 13 is, and I often hear it talked about as like the hall of faith. Like it's here, are all of these wonderful, faithful people. Well, it, the people in that list, like Abraham and like Noah and everyone else, are really conflicted people. They actually make some really big mistakes. They do
Yeah.
some really big things wrong in their life. So Hebrews 13 isn't lifting them up for their like perfect piety, but they're lifting them up because they see in them an example of exactly what we're talking about. They're willing to participate and structure their life, their world, their community in a way that actually believes God's promises are real. And that's the substance of faith. Not getting it all right in our actions, but in that core belief that God is real, and that realness of God should make a real difference in how we live.
What do you think, Liz?
It's beautiful. I mean, that's great. I'm trying to get us back to digging ditches, but
Yeah.
we could go on there forever.
But that's it, right, Liz? Like, I think that what the question the text asks us is, what ditches are we digging? Like, what does it look like in an analogous way to dig ditches today, especially at a time when, honestly, I think a lot of people are feeling hopeless, or they're feeling like, gosh, there's not a lot of good news. Like, what does it look like to structure our lives around the promise of the gospel in a world that seems to be falling apart? Right? How do we not fall into despondency? How do we actually take part in preparing for God intervening in our world in a way that is not yet with us, right? Or what even think about it as parenting. I mean, how do we dig ditches for our children, for a future that they're going off to that is also unknown? Like, what is that? So it can happen on a grand sort of community scale, but it also happens in our families. How do we dig ditches for marriages into the future, right? All of it, I think, invites us into this hopeful space that we see the text explore.
Yeah.
So the prophets, go ahead, Liz, you go.
Me? Okay. So I was just going to take us back to what the prophet says, which is the sending of water in the wilderness is easy for God to do.
Yeah.
He'll also go, and you're also going to get victory later, right, with the Moabites. So what do we see there?
Yeah, I mean, so it has like a double function. The water is this humanitarian relief. It provides people life in the midst of a threat, but it also is a promise of victory. As you sustain the soldiers in the wilderness, it will give Israel and Judah victory over Moab. So it's kind of happening both on the communal and the interpersonal, as well as in like the macro and sort of the political. Both is being negotiated here by the one and same God.
Jen.
That didn't feel like a mic drop, but
because then you've got the go knock out the Moab fortifications, level their villages. Like, why does Elisha do this? What's going on? Like, what?
I think that's what we're struggling with, because we're so like, oh, we're peaceful and we're not violent, and the Old Testament is hard.
The hope of God is coming.
Yeah, we're digging the ditches. It's all good. Yeah, I want the story to end about 2 verses earlier.
Maybe we should
just leave it out. Just leave it out. No, I think it's important actually to engage with that end, because it's important for us to deal with all truth in its fullness, and not to whitewash it into a truth that's convenient for a particular message. And at the end of the story, Elisha gives this advice to say, like, hey, go knock out the farms and uproot the plants, and that would have been clearly a violation of what were then rules of warfare. Like today we have like Geneva Conventions and other things like that. Well, the ancient world had rules of war as well, and war was permissible, but there were always boundaries to it. And one thing you didn't do in ancient warfare is destroy a people's means of production or means of substance. As yes, you can topple the city, you can knock down its walls, you can destroy its temples, but don't destroy the farmland. Because if you do, it's not then just a political victory, it's a humanitarian crisis. It leaves innocent people beyond the scope of war, suffering beyond what can be justified. And so we hear now Elisha actually telling them to violate these rules of war. And look, just to be really honest, I find it incredibly disturbing. And I think an ancient reader would have found it disturbing as well. And in a way, it's a cautionary tale. Like, Elisha does not get it all right. Yes, he's taken up Elijah's mantle. Yes, he's now the Lord's prophet. Yes, he invites people into this beautiful work of digging ditches to contain God's abundance. And his religious zeal, at least in this one particular case, I think pushes him too far. And that's something we need to all like recognize within our own selves and our own religious tradition, where a positive, affirming religious zeal
Right.
might push us to go too far in a way that actually ends up harming others. That happens in our world. It happens with each of us. And Elisha here is not an example to follow, but he's a cautionary tale about what not to do.
I love that because I always say that the more and more I read the Old Testament, especially, is I find myself seeing what not to do, right?
That's
Like
right.
over and over. And it's a people that continuously got
Yeah.
things wrong, and God still kept seeking them, right? And God's still coming after them, but they continuously messed up.
Yeah.
And we do
And
too.
we do too. And Liz, that's actually so sometimes I get bummed out. I'm like, why are all of these characters in the part of the Bible that I teach so often getting it wrong? Like that's such a drag, right? Wouldn't it be easier if they were all? But I actually think that's the good news of the Old Testament because it's not a story about all of these faithful people who make all of the right decisions about following God. It's a story at its core about a God who sticks with people who, much like us, often get it wrong. Like that's what's so good about the good news of Jesus, and that's what's so good about the stories that we find in the Old Testament as well. It's a beautiful thing that we should lift up.
So I think that's a really good place to pause for this
I
week.
agree.
You've given us, we have a lot to think about and a lot to keep unpacking throughout this week. So keep wrestling at home. These are tough scriptures to deal with. There's a reason we don't preach them too often. So keep wrestling, keep searching, keep praying. Join us on Sunday, and Pastor Jen will help us finish this off a little bit. And then we'll come back next week and tackle yet another, shall I call it, tough text of the Old Testament? All right. Bye.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jen.
Bye.
Thanks, Liz.